Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Everyone's had quite a long conference, quite hot in here, so not much we can do about this, I guess, but a slight smell of food coming from somewhere. Yeah, there you go, which is also not a bad thing. So welcome to this session, Active Directory Integration and Home Folders. I'll go through what we're going to talk about in a second. If anyone's wondering, though, we are going to talk about both parts, so getting Macs integrated with Active Directory and troubleshooting, and then talk about home folders. It'd be a bit difficult to just go straight to one section. Quick introduction. So my name is David Acland, and I work for a company called Amsys in the UK. You probably could guess from the faint accent. I've been there for quite a few years. On any of the social medias, Slack, Twitter, and so on, I just go by David Acland, just to try and keep it easy, and a picture of myself, again, just to keep it easy, rather than pictures of donkeys and other things. So, Amsys is a technical services company focusing purely on Apple technologies, and being a third-party services company, we get to go to lots of different places and see lots and lots of different weird and wonderful setups. When it comes to troubleshooting Active Directory, it's something we're just having to do on a weekly basis. So yeah, lots of experience there. Just to give you a slight background on where I've come from. So I've been doing this since sort of 99, so on, but started doing hardware repairs, then became a trainer for about 6-7 years before getting into projects and support. A couple of thought bubbles there. At that point, I have no idea what Active Directory is, and this was probably 2002, I suppose. I'd heard of it and started reading books about it. And I became a trainer at that point, so I was delivering support essentials or help desk essentials, if anyone remember that name. And I spent loads of time looking at Windows Server and Active Directory integration and how it all works. So by kind of that point, I thought, yep, nailed it. I know Active Directory, this works. So it hadn't quite dawned on me that I was used to a Windows server that I just set up, and then 10 Mac clients at most. I thought, yeah, this works pretty well. So then the Xserve died off, and we started getting asked to do lots of projects to get hundreds and hundreds of Macs, or even more, connected to Active Directory with home folders, and people just wanted to kind of replicate what they had before, which with Xserves and Open Directory, I don't know if anyone has come from that background, and we typically did full network home folders, and actually it worked kind of well. But I definitely went into the, oh no, why isn't this working phase. This would have been sort of 2008 or so. And I had two big projects at that point that really, I still have the scars to this day. One was a school setup. This was about sort of 300 machines. They had Xserves and RAIDs and full network home folders. And they said, right, they want to get rid of, it was Open Directory at the time, get rid of Open Directory, switch to Active Directory, and just keep it the same. And I thought, yeah, great, okay. But you do that, and in theory, everything's the same, but we're getting about a 10% log-on failure rate. So for a school, this was pretty catastrophic. You've got 300 machines, 5 lessons per day. That's a lot of support calls, and also someone not being able to log in is kind of catastrophic. That means that person can't work. The other project I worked on was a business, about 150 users, and they were a worldwide company, and the users had laptops and were just traveling around the world the whole time. Quite often not on the domain, so very different kind of problems though. In that case, 10.6 had just come out, and they had a .local Active Directory domain. And I thought, well, you know, what could go wrong here? Yeah, lots of lessons there. So the first project we had in sort of that school project, I said we had to develop a solution sort of there and then because we couldn't just leave it with 10% of the users not able to log in from one lesson to the next. So a lot of this presentation will just be the kind of tools and techniques we're using to minimize the problems, get around the problems, and bring in some other extra solutions. So it'll be split into two main sections. Active Directory integration first off, bit of troubleshooting, some of the tweaks that we do. So this isn't like a training session. This is just as a service provider, and when we go from one company to another, some of the things that we do to try and minimize the number of AD logon issues that you can get. And then the home folders are just some of the specific solutions we've built around that. Various things from troubleshooting, syncing, drive mounting, and so on. A quick note just on the scripts that I'm going to be talking about. So being a bit old, having done this for a while, I use Bash. If I've taken one thing away from this conference, it's I need to really learn Python. But we use Bash a lot, and those scripts work fine. And the scripts are on GitHub, so don't worry about frantically trying. I know there'll be a video coming in maybe a month's time, and the slides will be available somewhere, but the scripts are also on GitHub, so you'll be able to just get them. And okay, so we'll start with just the integrating with Active Directory. There's been a bit of talk recently, I don't know if some of you seen those discussions on Twitter about why should we bind Macs to AD. Interesting, and it is always worth just looking at the main objectives, just if someone's looking to integrate. So, for example, at Amsys, we've got about 60 people working for us. So the Macs don't get bound to Active Directory. We have some central directories for the server services, but beyond that, we're not going to join the machines to Active Directory. Plus, a lot of them work like me, and we're traveling around all the time, so we wouldn't be in range of a domain controller anyway. The main reasons, though, login window authentication, and the reason I'd say this isn't dead is partly because of schools. So you have labs of shared devices, tens of thousands or more students, and they need to be able to log onto any one of the computers. This is exactly what this is built for. So there's no getting away from that. And then more recently, interestingly, it's been mostly in the last year or so. I've been involved in loads of projects with sort of enterprise Wi-Fi networks or enterprise VPN using machine-based certificates from Active Directory. And those require the machine is joined to Active Directory first to get the certificate. So there is still a bunch of cases why this is relevant. If it's the bottom one, single username and password for all services, I definitely say that it doesn't need you to join the Mac to Active Directory. Maybe you want Kerberos authentication, but if you just want to, if you've got a bunch of server services that the users connect to, that doesn't mean you need to join the Macs to Active Directory themselves. Okay. Okay, so first off, just getting connected. Again, this is just some of the things that we do. We use Casper a lot, and we have used Deploy Studio a lot. Probably not so much in the last year, but using pretty much Casper and a bit of Monkey. You can obviously use just the GUI to join a Mac to Active Directory. Obviously, we're normally doing this on scale, so we're not going to visit every machine and launch directory utility and bind the Mac, but you can obviously do that. If we have a choice, we'll use the built-in tool, so either Casper or Deploy Studio. Casper's got an option to just bind the Mac to Active Directory, and we'll generally use that, partly because then it's a bit more secure. If you have a payload-free package with a script inside it that joins Active Directory, that's typically going to have a password in there that is, I know it could be a flat package, but then there's always ways of opening them and seeing what's inside. So if we can, we'll just use the tools that are available. If we're going to use a script, we'll just use dsconfig AD. So just out of interest, hands up who's used dsconfig AD before? Loads of you. Oh, great. Okay, good. So yeah, the most basic form is just that. Add the domain, computer name, user, password, and then it binds. It's most simple form. That's it. I'll just put that other command or option down there, the -OU option. So dropped it into the specific OU that you want, and that's really useful. As soon as we start adding these, though, because again we're a third-party services company, so we go to a site and we say, what OU do you want the Mac objects or computer objects to drop into, and we get a real mix of responses. I have had what's an OU before when I've asked them that question, and I'm like, you are the Windows admin, right? I'm not missing something, and a whole range. And then sometimes we get say, right, this is the OU we're going to use, and it's got a typo in it, and that just throws us off completely. because it's like I start a new job every week, every place I go to, so I don't know that that's wrong. I just, unless it's very obvious. Third-party tool, I just mentioned Centrify Express. We probably use this about once a year, I would say, and it's when we just can't, it's just not working. The Mac just is not binding to Active Directory. Sometimes it's just a particular version of OS 10 that's out at that point that's got some kind of bug with it. And I've had a case before where certain machines can't bind to Active Directory. There's some kind of problem. It's just a nice free tool. It's got some limitations around the home folder setup, which I'll come on to a bit later. But if we have a choice, we don't use it, because we don't like to add additional software. If we're building a new image for deployment, when we're adding in lots of software already, we don't really want to be adding in extra plugins if we don't have to. So we like to use the native tools where we can. So just on the troubleshooting side, what if you can't connect? And there's a whole load of different reasons, and this probably isn't a definitive list, but there's a whole bunch of reasons why this can happen. Active Directory permissions, you could just be given an Active Directory username and password that isn't allowed to join computers to the domain. Or the OU that you're trying to write into, you might have the OU correct, but that has permissions on it as well, so maybe you don't have the permissions to write the computer object in there. A few other ones, obviously DNS. DNS is a big one, but I don't think in the last 6, 7, 8 years that I've actually gone somewhere where DNS is not working for Active Directory, because if that was the case, there would probably be thousands of PCs that are also not working, so it just kind of gets solved. Service reachability, this is usually when you're just off the domain. If I'm working in like a school environment and it's a LAN, then that's obviously going to not be an issue. Date and time I throw up there, but that's just always check the clock on the machine. If you're trying to bind a Mac to Active Directory and the clock is out, then and I have just forgotten about that in the past and thought, no, it must be more complicated than that. And yeah, it's not. Computer name length, so 15 characters. And occasionally you get so you're either sort of doing the traditional stick asset stickers on the machine, name the computer by the asset sticker. Not very often that you get asset stickers over 15 characters, but sometimes you get a computer naming convention that is longer than 15 characters and can't handle it. In that binding script, we'll quite often, where we're grabbing the computer name, we'll just pipe that into a cut command and just say cut to 15 characters, and it just chops off the excess, and that works really well. So, the last couple of possibilities, we don't get this very often because quite often we're doing new setups, so the machines are kind of being wiped and installed. But if you have machines that have been around for a while, you can have corrupt client files. The Active Directory setting, like plist files in OS 10, have always been fragile, to say the least. So they could just break, and you have to just chuck them out. Okay, and then the actual process itself, Open Directory AD, can often get itself stuck. So this is just kind of a full list. Just to explain some of the troubleshooting steps we tend to take. First off, we're definitely looking to see if it's a client network or server related problem. So I'm turning up at a new place and I don't know really anything about the environment. I don't know how the server's configured. I can usually assume that things like, although I'll do some testing, I can assume things like the DNS is working and the domain controller is actually up, because otherwise, well, things wouldn't be as calm and people would be trying to get that working. But the client side, are any other Macs affected? Is it just one or is it loads of them? Kind of all that kind of obvious thing tells you a lot. Was it previously working, now it's not working, in which case, and we have a lot of cases where AD service accounts that are used to join Macs to Active Directory, the password gets changed. The general rule is you're not supposed to do that, but some people do, and then they always forget to tell the Mac people, so your Deploy Studio workflow suddenly it can't bind to Active Directory anymore. Network, obviously, there's a few possibilities there. I've got a couple of example commands that I'll use just to do some testing on that point. So on that point of has this configuration ever worked, that's obviously massively important, because if you're trying to write into an OU, if it was working before and now it's stopped working, you can generally assume that unless the OU's been deleted or something, that's going to be okay. But it could be something like the service account password getting changed. What we often do, though, is just go back to I call it a minimal system, not in the hardware sense, but literally just OS 10 and join to Active Directory and nothing else. I've been talking to people on a few forums, even in the past week, who've said, we've got our new machines, we're adding this bit of software and that bit of software, and one of the packages is breaking the AD bind. And it's always worth just stripping that all out and going back to, can OS 10 actually connect to your Active Directory at all? Because if it can't, then there's some kind of real fundamental problem, and then forget all the other packages, because it's not going to be, it won't be any of them. Obviously getting back to a minimal system, and has it ever worked? If possible, go to a version of OS 10 that you definitely know works. So say you get 10.10.4, there's been a bunch of changes to the 10.10.4 on the DNS side. So if you get a 10.10.4 machine, it can't bind to Active Directory, just test 10.10.3 again and say, well, was that working? You know, is it just the new OS? Well, I hope not, but. Right, on the client side, there's a couple of commands here. I guess some of you will know these. On the DNS side, and this is because I don't really know what the domain controllers are going to be called, or if I can ping them and so on. So I'll use the host command. You could do this with dig as well, but the host command, -t srv, that will look up the service location record, and it should give you back the domain controller or domain controllers that it's finding. So very, very useful command. Check the clock, but actually we tend to just set the Mac to use the domain controller as its time server. That's kind of it. So when I turn up at a new site, I'll first of all run the host command, get the name of the domain controller, set that as the time server with the other command, and then I know that the clock is correct as far as the domain controller is concerned. Okay, check what DC the client's using. This is on some of the much bigger setups. If I'm going into a school and they've just got their own domain controller and that's it, it's not really going to be a problem. But on a larger site where you have lots of domain controllers possibly around the world, this particular preference file tells you what one the Mac is actually trying to use. So it's a pretty useful one, that. If it's a machine that's been around for a while, then just delete all the preference files. So maybe delete the computer object from Active Directory, clean it up on that side, and then on the client side, just delete the Active Directory related files in Library, Preferences, Open Directory. And if you still think it's going to the wrong domain controller, you can set a preferred one with dsconfig AD, which is quite neat. If I just want to check service reachability, I like to use the nc command. It's pretty similar to telnet in its behavior, except it doesn't try and log into anything. It literally just does a port test and comes back and says succeeded or failed, and that's it. Obviously, you firewall and rule out physical issues. So if you're trying to join a Mac to Active Directory and you've never done that from that location, then there's always the possibility it's just being blocked, and that's it. Rule out physical issues. Obviously, don't just have a broken cable and then spend 3 hours doing all the clever stuff. On the server side, we're kind of lucky. This is usually someone else. Well, I say lucky, probably lucky and unlucky at the same time. So lucky that we can kind of say there's a problem with Active Directory, but unlucky in that we're an external company. We come in, I can't just go to the Windows admin on day one and say, you've got a problem. And then suddenly defensive barriers come up and can't get past them. So I try and get as much useful information as possible. I try and do all of these different tests and gather information, and then go to them with a sort of definitive what I think the problem is. Okay. A couple of things that we often do if we're really stuck. I still try and do a bind with directory utility. So I know a load of you said that you use dsconfig AD, and we use that for the main bind, like once we've got it working. But directory utility actually gives you really good feedback, whereas dsconfig AD sometimes can't. So if you put like a script to join Active Directory and deploy Studio or some other tool, and then you deploy the machine and it's not bound to Active Directory, it's very hard to find out the reasons why. So just launch directory utility and try the bind from there. And it quite often will tell you things like, clock skew too great, or kind of like nice, helpful error messages. We also just test, if we suspect that it's the account that we've been given and it's not allowed to join Active Directory, we'll test with the domain admin account. We won't use the domain admin account after that point to continue binding all the machines, because that's bad practice, but If it works with that and doesn't work with the other account we've been given, at least we know it's the permissions. Test with a pre-created computer object, and that has different, might have different behavior. And try just writing to the default OU as well. So if you get given a different or a very long OU to join to, then maybe there is a problem with it, maybe there's a typo, maybe there isn't. Just write it to computers and see what happens. Okay, and then the other side of it is we're connected, but there's some other problems. And these can be harder to get around, harder to troubleshoot. So these are some of the main ones. Slow logons, which has plagued us for years. There's so many different reasons for that. Failed reconnects or computers dropping off the domain. And then our latest favorite for 1010 was the Macs crashing on startup, stopping at 50%. I had to get a mention because it's, even though it's been fixed. So some of the commands that we tend to run with dsconfig AD are these ones here. And we might not use all of them in every particular scenario, but there's kind of reasons why for each one. First of all, that minus SharePoint and minus use UNC path, that's related to reading the SMBHome attribute from AD and then mounting the network home. That was one of the big causes of failed logons and causing a lot of the instabilities. It's not guaranteed you might get some environments where it's fine, but we were getting lots of cases where having those enabled seemed to make the mounting of the network home a requirement of the completed login process. So if it failed, if it couldn't reach the file server, or all these different things, the login process would fail and you get an error message saying you can't log in at this time or something like that. Apple's recommendation on that was just to restart the computer, but after rebooting about 5 times and it's still not working, you kind of get, and especially if that's a class you're trying to get started, that's a bit of a distraction. So we switched those off, and I'll come back to the home folder bit in a minute about how we get around that. Pass interval 0. Is anyone setting that option, the pass interval? A couple of people. Okay. So this is for machines that are off the network a lot. So every 14 days, by default, it will try and change the computer object password. And this is where I think it was 10. Might have been 10.4 or 10.5 where this came in. So people that were making monolithic images that were pre-bound to Active Directory before deployment, suddenly they found out that every 14 days all the machines got kicked off the network, realizing that you're not really supposed to join the Mac as part of the image and then deploy that out. So, but the 14-day thing, if you get people that are off the network a lot and not in range of the domain control, we found that they were just kind of getting kicked off. It was trying to change the password, failing. When they came back to the network, it just wasn't reconnecting. So in that scenario, we really found that this wasn't, it was an added layer of security, but it was a bit probably unneeded. We'd choose stability over this option, given that the other layers of security that are already there. Mobile enable, again, this is for people off the network. You have to have the mobile accounts enabled, because otherwise they can't log in. But if it was a business environment, and say they had iMacs everywhere, but people had their own set machines that they used, we'd probably still use the mobile accounts, because if they get in one day and there's some kind of network outage or some kind of problem, they could just log in and still use their apps. They might not be able to connect to file servers or that kind of thing, but at least they can log in and work. We won't really use it in places where it's shared devices, so a school lab, we wouldn't bother, because people are logging into different computers all the time, so there's not really any need. Mobile confirm disable, we've never found any reason to ask the user if they would like to have a mobile account, because they don't really know what it means anyway. And so, force option we use sometimes, that just helps dsconfig AD if it's being asked a question, like, would you like to take ownership of this pre-existing computer object, or that kind of thing. Force just basically says answer yes to any questions that come back. So the nice thing about this is you can still use the tools in things like Deploy Studio or Casper to do the bind, and then you can run just a separate command with dsconfig AD to set all of these other options. So that it doesn't have to be run at the same time as the binding command, which is good. Okay, slow logons. So a couple of things we do. Depends on the size of the AD, but sometimes we'll prevent it from, we'll switch off the all domains option. So by default, if you just bind a Mac to AD, it will allow authentication from any domain in the forest. And if that's a very, very large Active Directory, you can have problems, either slow logons or sometimes it just fails to bind altogether. So we just disable that, that feature. We won't do it as a matter of course, we'll only do it if there is a particular problem and then need to address it. I just put DSCL underneath that. You then use DSCL to edit the search paths, and we've got example commands in the GitHub page. I didn't put them there because you just have a whole page of DSCL commands which are not easy to read. Set a preferred domain controller, so that again helps if there's speed issues. And then a couple of other things that we have done sometimes. Login window DS bind timeouts in a number of seconds. So again, it just helps to kind of speed up the process, and the home folders are a big one. So if those two options at the bottom, SharePoint and use UNC path, are enabled, that can, you think it wouldn't, you think it's just trying to mount a home folder, but it does have a real impact on whether the logging in is successful or not, and the speed of it. If the machines are failing to reconnect to Active Directory, again, it depends on the environment. For school setups, we tend to set the machines to not go to sleep, but just put the display to sleep. So the computer stays running, and then we say, right, and then out of hours, we just set it to shut down, and then start up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning so they're ready for the next day. We found that machines actually going to sleep, they'd all wake up, they'd all get woken up again, and not all of them would reconnect to Active Directory, and then someone can't log on, so easier just to switch that off. If you've got sort of laptop users, it's a bit harder because they'll be walking around from one place to another, closing the lid, putting it to sleep. So obviously you'll be using mobile accounts, they're not really going to notice it quite as much, but you can do a few things like restarting Open Directory. You can obviously reboot the computer, that will fix it 9 times out of 10. And if it is a business and it's laptop users, then obviously you've got issues with regards to Kerberos tickets expiring. I don't know if any of you have got users that just never, they're using Active Directory, but they never log off, so they just have these sort of dead Kerberos tickets. So you can sort of add in steps to try and prompt the user for a password and renew the Kerberos tickets. And also just that pass interval command as well. Okay, if computers drop off the domain, first off, I'll just say don't trust dsconfig AD -show. I don't know if you've tried using that before, because that will just say, yes, you're connected to Active Directory. That means, yes, the Mac is configured to be connected to Active Directory. It doesn't mean it's actually connected to Active Directory. If you try a DSCL command, you'll then get error messages back to say the configuration files are there, but it's not actually connected. We have used a self-heal script in the past. So, and the main logic behind this has been check the network connectivity, check that it's actually on the network that should be able to reach a domain controller, and then try and read its own computer object back. And then if it fails to read the computer object back, then give it 2 minutes or wait, try again. If it fails again, then trigger a rebind. And that kind of just helps to self-fix some of these issues. And then check with the Windows guy. If you get Macs that are dropping off Active Directory constantly, I would say that that's definitely not normal. And don't just put in one of these kind of self-healing scripts as a matter of course, because you're kind of patching over some kind of underlying problem. Did anyone get bitten by this one? Macs crashing on startup? Yeah, pretty annoying. There was this little fix, boot cache control jettison, which actually seemed to kind of, so 10.10.2 and earlier, that kind of seemed to fix it a bit, but then 10.10.3 came out, which from what we saw kind of stamped it out completely. But we were worried at that point. Okay, .local, so whenever we get a new customer that says we want to join our Macs to Active Directory and it's a .local domain, we do just say right up front, this is not going to be as smooth as people with non.local domains. And the reason behind it is because of this MDNS system. So Apple assumes if it's a .local domain name that it needs to do a multicast broadcast because it thinks it's bonjour, and it's just the way it works. So and then it'll eventually time out, and then do a unicast look up to your DNS server, and then kick in. So if that is causing a problem, then you can do again, you can adjust the timeout here, so an MDNS timeout. And this just helps to kind of speed up that process where it times out, it gives up trying to do a multicast broadcast. Okay. Just one other thing we do on the Active Directory side. I don't know if anyone's used this in the past. If we're doing a kind of sign-off, say we've done a deployment of a whole school and got them all joined to Active Directory, we'll kind of do this in batches and simulate a mass logon to all the machines. So obviously replace username and password with the relevant usernames and passwords, but put it into ARD, send it out to all the machines, and then they'll all log on at exactly the same time. And it's a really good way of just checking that everything's working properly. If you're doing this kind of work during summer holidays and then all the kids are coming back after that, and you kind of think, I really hope this holds up, at least you can test it out beforehand, which is nice. Okay, so that's a kind of just a really quick run through of the stuff we're doing on the Active Directory side. Generally speaking, when we're kind of following all these rules, we have lots of sites that they're all logging on really smoothly, very, very few issues. But I'd say the number one thing that really caught us out was the home folders. So having that use UNC path checkbox enabled in directory utility, that was kind of the root cause of a lot of our problems. Which brings us on to the home folder section. So there's lots of different kind of configuration options here. I just want to cover a couple of things and kind of get an idea of what you're doing out there. First of all, the home folder itself. Mac OS X, each user account needs one. You can choose to put it in lots of different places, but essentially it's the data store and the Windows profile, if you like. So it's where all your user level settings, resources, fonts, preference files, that kind of stuff goes. Put that home. So when a user logs onto Mac OS X, they must have a home folder. Put that home folder into a location that Mac OS X doesn't really like on the network. Then that's when you can start having problems. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this, and probably even more than this. First of all, on the left you've got. So we're assuming this is still Active Directory users across the board. On the left, you've got just a local home folder. And this is generally what we do. The other options are full network home folder, where the home folder is stored on a file server only, and no data is stored locally on the machine. And then on the right-hand side is something that we don't typically do, but we've seen lots of places that do, where they just redirect some of the folders to the network. So it's a local home folder, but then they'll just redirect like desktop and documents to the file server, which kind of makes it like a full network home folder, really. But it seems to be, it's a bit of a compromise and seems slightly more stable than using the full network home folder. So I just wonder who's using the local home folder option on the left? About half, okay. What about the middle one? Yeah? Problems with it, or? Yeah, a few, okay. Yeah, yeah. And interestingly, this was going back to the start. If we transplanted this to Apple file servers and Open Directory, it actually seemed to work pretty well. We don't quite know how. It just seemed. But you replace Open Directory with Active Directory and replace a Mac file server with a Windows file server, and this really just doesn't. Yeah, it's not happy.
The reason why I'm here is because we're using Open Directory, and that's where we're getting the issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is just like preferences.
So also the Mac OS as well. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. So what do we do? Okay. So as I said, we use local home folders, and that is just our default, and we switch off the options in directory utility to actually try and mount the network home folder. So when it comes to actual network home folders, it's just a question of what the objective is, because we have got lots of sites where we just don't provide them network home folder at all. And no issues, it's just a local home, that's the end of it. And if it's a business, you can use things like that middle point, backing up user data. Do you need network home folders for that, or could you use CrashPlan or something similar? Yeah. See, there's other environments where it kind of needs to be, network home folders are really the only sensible solution. So I get asked some of these things, some of these other points before. Hot desking I get asked about, and it's just, yes, you can kind of do hot desking, but with a lot of caveats and a fair bit of pain. So, and we've had some cases where we've had like a primary school and they've kind of wanted to do the full AD network home folders. We're thinking, oh, these kids are this big, they can't handle this, and give them just one shared network drive. For the classroom, one shared network drive, done. Do they need more than that? There's lots of cases where you don't need to make it quite that complicated. As far as the actual mounting though, so we don't do this, and we actually do the SharePoint disable, use UNC path disable. The main reasons we do it, one is the stability. The other problem we get is that it mounts the top level share, which is really annoying. So if you have a set of home folders, and there's 1,000 of them in one folder, the user logs in, double clicks on the network drive on the desktop, and then they've got to find their home folder in the list. And if the permissions are wrong on any of them, then they can actually get into other people's data. So that's really not good. So when we do have network home folders, we'll use a logon script to connect to it. And we've got a couple of ways of doing it. One is triggering it a login. And if it's a school and it's full of iMacs or Mac Pros, then logon script is fine. If it's a business and it's laptop users, we'll generally make it something the user can just trigger whenever they want. Because otherwise they'll try and do it when they're not on the network or don't have network cable plugged in. Some people you may have seen on the internet, some people like to use a directory auto mount for sort of network drive mounting. We personally don't do that. We just tend to do scripts instead because we're kind of more like the control. So the logon script itself, we're just talking about reading from this bit here. So when you're looking at the properties of a particular user account, it's the network drive that's in there. I'll apologize in advance for the next slide because it's not, it's a lot of words, but there's kind of two key parts to it. The first part is the short domain name. So this was from 10.7 and above, where it used to be Active Directory all domains, and then it became Active Directory NetBIOS name all domains. And because we're going from one place to another, we had to have something that could just dynamically grab the NetBIOS name of the domain. So that's what that first short domain name variable is doing. And then the second command, the AD home part, is reading from Active Directory for that particular user, the SMBHome attribute, and then using that as the mount. Now, just to give you a slight example on this, because it's a bit hard to read. So I am cheating because you can never tell what the network setup's going to be like when you're doing a presentation. So I'm reading from a local file. Let's pretend that local file is my Active Directory. So the DSCL part of it, read from Active Directory and get the value back. And you'll typically get this back. You'll get SMBHome : and then backslashes and all this kind of stuff that we don't want. I've seen this at 2 places. A space in the short name completely confused us. We don't even know. I didn't even think it was possible, but clearly it is. And sometimes you get spaces in the other paths as well. So all we're really doing is adding on extra bits to this. So I don't know if anyone's used SED before. It's Stream Editor, so it will take the text input, and then it can do like a find and replace. So here I'm saying find SMBHome : and replace it with nothing. And then it strips that off. And then so on. So if I get... So that one takes any backslashes and turns them into forward slashes. And then a couple of others so I want to get rid of the first 2 forward slashes. So basically just pipe it through, clean it up into a nice string of text, and then that's it. So yeah, looks horrible, but that's kind of where we got to. And this, we've been using this for about 5 years now, and we haven't had to add anything to it since then. So the very last couple of bits, the TR, where it's piped into the TR command, we had one site, and then we haven't seen it since, where the path was so long it was wrapped onto a second line. So we had to remove the carriage return, and then didn't see it again. And then this site where they have spaces in the short name, so replace a space with %20, and then it works. So all a bit odd. So I've seen similar examples to this in a few other places, and usually kind of much shorter, not quite so many sed commands, but it depends if that kind of works in your environment, and then you're okay. This kind of just, we take this and just use it anywhere, and it works, which is why it's got so many bits on it. We also have another bit of code, and again, don't forget this is all on GitHub, so you've got to grab this afterwards, but we have a bit of code where we'll just check that we actually got a value back, because you can't run a script that's mounting a network drive when you're reading a value. And sometimes, and I've seen this go horribly wrong, where it reads a value from somewhere, doesn't get anything back, so the variable is empty, and then it tries to do loads of other bits and pieces, mounting drives and with this bit of blank space. And sometimes, and I've seen people put in like RM commands in there to get around certain issues. And if you kind of say RM/volumes nothing, you can imagine what's going to happen. So we check if we actually got something back, and then just log whether it worked or not. This is our latest favorite home mounting bit of code. And yeah, it's AppleScript, in case anyone's wondering. We'd used the mount command for years, but the mount command, you had to make the mount point first with the make directory command. And the number of times where a folder gets left behind that we don't want there anymore, it kind of gets trips over itself and gets stuck. And also the mount command was a bit, you have to tell it whether it's going to use Kerberos or not, or how it's going to work. This code, this AppleScript code, kind of does it the way the Finder does it. And if you've got a Kerberos ticket, it will use that. But if it doesn't have a Kerberos ticket, it can ask the user, it just comes up with the enter your username and password dialog box. And also it handles the creating of the mount point folder and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's just, this seems to be a lot cleaner. Okay. You all right?
I was just going to ask if you had trouble, if you ever had a problem with the AppleScript, like it activated it and someone, maybe if they were working with it, pulled up something else and then failed to mount. I guess they wouldn't be logged in.
Yeah. So yeah, there was just a quick question about whether we get sort of failures on the AppleScript command, whether we get failures with this. Every once in a while, I mean, AppleScript has always been a bit like that. It sometimes just comes up with an error message. At login, not much else is going on anyway, so we find that pretty successful. We had more issues with the mount command than we do with this, but yeah, if you're mounting network drives, you can say there are still going to be some failures. So it's, nothing's foolproof. We normally, it's not, I don't think it's there. Oh yeah, we've got activate Finder. So that means when it runs, it brings the Finder forward and then runs. So it's a known state, because otherwise, if you didn't have that and they're in Firefox, then it might try and tell Firefox to mount your network drive, and then it'll, yeah. Okay, so the other couple of things that we do, this is just kind of for the user, polishing it and for the user experience, add it to the doc, and we just use docutil these days for this kind of thing. I'm not a big fan of managing docs if I can possibly help it, but in school environments we tend to more. But this will just add the network drive to the end. There's an equivalent option. So the question was how do you remove it from the doc if you want to, but yeah, there's an equivalent remove command for docutil. I think it is just minus remove or something like that. Yeah. So this is, they've already logged in. So they've logged in, they've mounted the drive. Yeah. The other one, and I'm a big fan of this sidebar Python command. So this is for the Finder sidebar. So if someone, the situation we had is where a user's working in Microsoft Word and the network drive is on the desktop and it's in the dock, but if they hit file save in Microsoft Word or something like that, then how do they find their network drive? And they have to kind of find the servers and so on. So we just add it into their shortcuts in the sidebar as well. It's kind of the last place, the final place you kind of need to put it. So this command is really, really nice. You just give it the path, tell it, and you can actually, there's loads more options on this. You can tell it to go after a certain icon and do all sorts of clever things with it. But in this case, we just say put it first. Obviously, being a folder, this will go first on the folder section, but after the apps. Yep. Hi.
On this, with adding it to the sidebar, have you ever noticed, like, if it's connecting to a server that has load balancing, and so it's not always the same IP, that putting it in the sidebar gives you problems where you click on that and it sort of mounts again?
We've probably just been lucky and not hit that. So the question is if you've got file server behind a load balancer, and it might not be the same IP all the time that it's hitting. Would it put in a duff link, I suppose? Yeah, definitely possible. I haven't hit that problem, I guess, but that might just be more luck than anything else. Yeah. Okay. Right. So that's our method for mounting the network home. Works pretty nicely. We do, if I put that there? I think I missed a step somewhere. We do also just put that script into an AppleScript that the user can click on. So, especially for laptop users, especially in business environments, we don't, if it's laptop users, we don't really want them mounting the drive at login because the chance of them being on the right network is slim. So just give them a dock icon that they can just click on. Works fine. So, the last part is just the syncing section, and this is not as easy as it seems. And is anyone trying to do home folder syncing here? Few people, yeah. It's a can of worms as far as I'm concerned. But so a couple of things about it though. On the goals side, we first had to really get this working in probably about 2009, I think, 2009, 2010. And this was for a particular government project. It was across loads and loads of schools, and there was a particular bit of compliance that said that all user data must be centrally backed up. But we're not talking about one-to-one deployments or anything nice like that. This was all labs of shared machines, Active Directory, home folders. So we knew that we couldn't just use network home folders because that would just introduce a whole load of other problems. So we just wanted a way of getting the data from the local home folder up to the network in a kind of as painless way as possible. Hot desking, again, the question comes up. The definition of hot desking can be, people have different ideas as to what that actually means. Full network home folders would be the real hot desking, but it just doesn't work properly. So it's kind of a bit, you have to compromise somewhere. Big questions though on, do the users really need it? And we've actually had a school once where the IT department insisted that the data was synchronized to the network drive. And then a year later they said, can we switch off the syncing? And the syncing was actually working, but the users were just getting completely confused by it, because stuff was just moving around without their input, and they didn't quite understand what was going where, when it was happening, what triggers it, all that kind of stuff. So we often say to a school, try local home folders first and see what you think, because actually that might just be enough. Costs. So if a customer asks us, please, can we have home folder syncing? It's really worth pointing out that it costs more to put in as part of the initial project, and it will always cost more to maintain, because if you are trying to sync data, it's going to fail now and again, and you're going to get issues, and you need to have a technician that can fix it. So, question?
You may deal with this a bit. When we were putting this in place to sync the home folders to the AD, we found that there was an ungodly amount of data that was generated on the Windows server.
Mm-hmm.
That was far more data than the Windows computers were producing.
Right, yeah.
Stored on that. We didn't know where
Okay. Well, I guess it was just transplanting what was on the local machine up to the server. Yeah. So the question was just setting up Mac home folder syncing. It was generating a lot more data on the Windows server, especially compared to the Windows users. Obviously, Macs and PCs get used for different things anyway, so generally they're used in media, music, those kind of environments, so the data is just physically bigger. If they're doing any kind of Final Cut Pro or iMovie type work, think carefully about this data syncing because you'll just be generating massive amounts of data.
We found that we had to sync just the documents, although we excluded the rest of the
Yeah.
manager.
Yep, sure.
But we also found that if there was a file that existed in both places, there was a conflict with responsive to the user. And a lot of our users then panic and select create duplicate.
Yeah, and then the data can start ballooning because they're duplicating their stuff. Yeah, absolutely. So on the syncing part, you've got the built-in home sync tool, and we don't use it, and it's for a couple of reasons. First reason is it is a two-way sync, and we don't want in a lot of the environments we work in, we don't want a two-way sync because we want to centrally back up the user data and have a way that if they go to another machine, they can access the data. But we sat in lots of classes where we saw the teacher say to the whole class, right, everyone log on, and now we're going to start a new piece of work. If they've all moved seats, it's trying to pull down all that data again, and they don't want any of it or need any of it. They just want to log in, launch the application, and start working, and they don't need any of the previous data. So we found that the importance of getting the desktops of the machines ready as quickly as possible more important than trying to pull their data in multiple places. Plus just the duplication of data. It just, if they keep changing machines, it's just going to be duplicating over and over again. So we didn't like the two-way sync. We didn't like the fact it was quite unreliable. So I don't know if anyone's experienced that, but it just is. And it was the fact it kept asking the user. So it came up the sync conflict resolution tool and said to the user, what do you want to do? And it would be a file that they don't recognize, like it'd be some sort of hidden dot file that they don't know what it's for. And the IT department had no visibility because the only error messages actually came up on screen, and the user dismisses it, and then they'll tell someone a week later, oh yeah, I had an error, and can't remember what it was, and that's it. So for our setups, we've been using rsync for a number of years. This is a bit, you'll get people saying, don't use rsync. That's not quite true or quite what they mean. What they mean is this is a difficult thing to get just right, and also quite a dangerous thing to implement. So don't just shove in like a one-line rsync command to say, yep, just sync this from here to here, job done, because there's so many scenarios where things fail and you have to get it just right. So the example script we're using, I've again put on the GitHub, but just a couple of the key points. The great thing about this gave us full control over what went where and when. So we could decide when it's synchronized. We could specify just one particular folder or lots of folders. We could also specify what server. So we could use the SMBHome attribute, or we could use something else. We could use any file server we liked. So, and you don't get that kind of flexibility with the built-in home sync tool. We added in central reporting for failures, and also we could just keep developing it. So we go from one place to another, and we quite often end up sort of tweaking it slightly just for that particular environment. And because it's a script, it gave us the capability to do that. A couple of the key parts, just to give you some ideas of some of the stuff we're doing. When we do the rsync command, we do run it first with the -n option, and this does a dry run. And we use this to give us a number, and it tells us how much data it's going to be. First of all, it tells us if it's actually going to fail completely, in which case we can exit the script. But also we can say how much data is going to move. And then we'll do a df command on the network home folder and say how much space is there. And this respects the user quota. So the basic comparison is if the amount of data I'm moving is more than the space in the network home, log it, send an email and don't bother. We did have a really, really long script that we used, but actually we switched it just to a loop. So we just point it at the home folder and say, just loop through everything that's in there. And we're also using a filter, an rsync filter, just pointing it to an external file. And this looks a bit like, I had an example one. Okay, so this is just an example, just an example, but you can put in bits like this. This will just exclude any DMG files. So nice and easy. So you point the rsync command to a filter file, tell it what you want to filter out, and then that's it. Works really nicely. We also just capture the errors. So as the rsync command is running and it sort of just loops through each of the main folders, we're just logging this all into a separate error. If there are any errors, we're capturing that into an error file. We do that, and then we use the sendmail binary. That's been a free binary that's been floating around the internet for a while, and we use that to send a helpful error message to the IT department. We did at one place try sending it to the user, and they just, pointless. But send it to the IT department, at least then, and have it go to just a particular mailbox or go into a particular folder. At least they've got a record of, and because we're capturing the actual error from rsync, we get the exact path of what failed, why it failed. It's pretty helpful. Okay, a couple of the options that we include. So skip files that are newer on the receiver, very important. So you can imagine if you say just sync regardless, then you'll be trampling over newer files on the server. A couple of other, the recursing is obviously important. -v is also important just to get the verbose output, and we need that for the error capture. So if you don't do -v, you don't really get much feedback. Okay. Our default is to run this every 15 minutes whilst the user is logged in. It might sound a bit odd, but it obviously can't copy any locked files, but it can copy a lot of other files, and it means that when they come to log out, a lot of the data has already been synchronized. So it's just a kind of final cleanup and anything that was previously locked in the user session. And then we do a final sync at logout. And the last thing that we've done for a couple of places is we haven't made it automated, and we've just made a manual button. So giving it a nice icon and just turned it into an app. So still running the script, but giving it an AppleScript icon. The user can just click it and it synchronizes. So just gives you a sort of an alternative option. I'd say there are still some issues with this. You've got things like I don't know, iMovie data, for example, that has to be in a particular location. So you're syncing up to the network drive and the data's backed up. User logs into a different machine. They don't always know where to copy the data to, because they can't just drag it down to the desktop and work on it. There's compromises, but it still works pretty well. So. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Just questions? Yeah, so it's on that GitHub page. There, that GitHub page. Yeah.
And then what does that script do that cannot reach the file server in question? Like if the user takes the laptop home or something?
Yep.
To come to the microphone.
Okay, good point. Yep.
You need to come to the microphone, please, to talk, or else you can repeat.
Yeah, I'll repeat this one anyway. So the question was, what if the file server's not present, or the user's at home or something and it's trying to sync? Normally we just, and I think it's in that version of the script, I might just have to double check, but normally we just put in is the user on the network? If not, exit, which is pretty simple to do. You could just do like a ping command or various other commands just to say, am I on the network? You could also just put in ping the actual file server and say, can I reach the file server? Because actually that's the only thing that matters. Okay. Any other questions? So we've just got one over there. Yeah. You can use the mic if you like.
Since portable mics are a crazy idea. Run into a lot of trouble with indestructible computer objects. So if a computer has to be rebound for any reason, it fails because the AD server won't let it change the existing object. Is there any sort of comprehensive list of what set of rights an AD binding, or what the minimum set of rights an AD binding account might need to work?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's definitive. We generally find that as long as so you've got to delegate there's a right to join computers to the domain, which you need. Because interestingly, you can join with a standard account. I think there's a limit onto how many you can do, and also it can't take over pre-existing computer objects. But you delegate the right to actually join computers to the domain and write access to the OU that you're writing into. That's usually all we need. Okay.
With the rsync examples that you were just showing, is that strictly for user backup, or are you able to do that with hot desking as well, where they can move around and then access that data on another computer?
It can be for both. For hot desking, though, we just don't synchronize the data down to the machine. That's just our particular way of doing it, because although it's a compromise, it's just slightly. We found most of the time people don't want all their data synchronized down, and if you do pull data down to the machine, you can't really pick and choose what gets synced. So it kind of has to be an all or nothing thing.
So they would just then on a different machine have access to like their documents folder, and if they needed something, they would just.
So if they go to a new machine, so you kind of get hot desking, sort of. They can go to a new machine, the drive's there, they can pull the data down. They just have to be a bit more savvy about it. Okay.
I got two questions. What is your favorite method of converting unmanaged accounts to managed accounts? Like if you're taking an environment that's not AD joined and.
So local accounts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Are we talking, so a business environment? Yeah. So we still find, we script it a lot, but we still find still have to kind of handhold the user a fair amount. Normally it's just a script depends if the names are the same in Active Directory and local. But typically it is a case of preserving the home folder, renaming it to the Active Directory name, changing the ownership to the Active Directory account, and deleting the local user, but leaving the home folder in place, and then they just log back on, and as long as the home folder name matches the AD short name, log on, and that's it, done. We still go on the general rule of no more than 20 users per day, and have a technician that literally handholds the users through it, though, because even when you do that, stuff happens, stuff goes wrong, and trying to do too many, and it just causes a big problem.
My next question is, I'm always looking for clever solutions to getting machines that, say I got to ship a machine to a remote user who's not necessarily going to have VPN access the first time they boot the machine, and then getting that machine domain joined. I mean, you can log in through a local admin account and things like that, but does anyone come up with anything particularly interesting that will allow the machine to kind of be pre-bound?
I mean, you could, normally we're binding the machine to Active Directory, like the IT department are taking the machine, binding it to AD before it goes to the user. If it's the actual logon though, if you ship it to the user, they log on and
I guess it's not that it's pre-bound, it's that it doesn't have any access to the DC before you log in the first time.
Yeah. Not really. They'd have to, at best, they'd have to trigger some kind of VPN connection, which means they'd have to create a local account first. It's a bit messy, but yeah. So, a couple of years' time, hopefully.
Thanks.
All right.
Hi. Our biggest problem lately has been random mounting of network drives. Our home directories. So roughly half the time it works, half the time it doesn't. And our best guess is that it might be a timeout and LDAP slowness. Is there a way to confirm a timeout? And if it's happening, what's the best way to deal with it?
And how are you mounting the drive? Is it script?
Well, right
or-
now, we're using the AD plugin now.
Okay,
So would the
right.
script be more resilient? And let's say it did time out, is there a way to find out if that's the problem?
Yeah,
and
I,
deal
mean,
with it?
I think there's a couple of things with that. One is if you use a logon script, and we usually trigger it either via the management system like Casper or something, or just a launch agent, and the user logs on, and it gives you a bit more time before the script actually runs and then tries to mount the drive, whereas the AD plugin seems to try and do it very early on and half the time fails. If you use a script, the nice thing about it is that you can put in lots of logging. So all you do is, after every command, you can put echo, if you put echo $? That will give you the exit code of the last command that run. So I put that in at every point in the script, tell that to go out to a text file, run it, and then that tells me exactly why it failed.
Okay. And you found your script is more resilient than the AD plugin as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So just to follow up on what I was saying earlier about the server behind the load balancer and different IPs and so what we ended up doing for this user was instead of putting their share in the sidebar, we put the volumes folder, which is typically hidden, but you just put that in there and then they click on that and then they click on the share and then they go from there.
Yeah,
and ta-da, problem solved for this particular user.
Plus it's a nice cleaner script.
Yeah.
You just run on everything. Yeah.
So anyway. That's the question more of just a
Statement. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions or experience with cross-forest authentication?
Not really from the client side. So we find anything like that tends to be taken care of by sort of the Windows administrators. I mean, in what case?
Well, we have I'm from a university, and we have a domain for our faculty and staff to log into. We also have a guest domain where people could sponsor an account for people who are just visiting, so they can log into lab computers and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And I've not found a way to get the Mac OS to understand the concept of forests, basically.
I mean, that should just work, because by default it would allow authentication from any domain in the forest. You're talking about one forest with multiple domains, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that should just work.
Actually, no, it's cross-forest. So.
Multiple, oh, okay,
Yeah.
so I don't think I've ever been in that position, actually.
Okay.
That should be Active Directory handling that. That's domain trust. And your trusted relationship needs to be set up correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So two things. One is I noticed that, especially with the newer machines with SSD only, they boot up really, really fast before you really have a network connection. Users brought up to their mobile, to basically sign in with cache credentials. And then sometimes it's like before a network account is negotiated. So with the slow, it's a little bit slower, and sometimes I find that there's issues with, or I think that may be part of the reason why in one of my customers' environments seems to lose trust with the domain, as if it was not really actually authenticating at that point.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's possible that could be done, to try?
Yeah, I mean, it is a problem when people are always logging into a cached account, pretty much. It's the same problem with enterprise Wi-Fi. When if you don't do it sort of the proper way to get Wi-Fi at the login window, a lot of people set it up so the user logs in with their AD account with a network cable plugged in, and then they'll connect to the Wi-Fi and get it all working, and then unplug the cable and go away. And then every time they're logging in, they're actually logging into a cached account, then it connects to Wi-Fi. And it will cause a problem over time. So if your password policies are set to must change password every 90 days or something, that never really kicks in properly. There's all sorts of problems. So it's important you have to get the users to log in, authenticate against the domain controller at least some of the time. And it's just a case of either, unfortunately, the machine boots up really quickly, but just making sure that the login window appears when the network is ready, and then let them log in, which is a shame because then you have to add in some delays. But yeah, there isn't really any other way around it.
And then I noticed that you mentioned that you have a sort of like a self-healing script that kind of checks to see if the domain's available, and then if it sees a problem, it tries to rebind to the domain. But that's still going to be dependent that you're still going to need to have a binding script as part of that, and the account that's inside of the script is going to have to be one that has the ability to overwrite an existing computer account, or
yeah. So the actual so you have a separate script that can handle binding, and that might be if it's Casper, for example, that might just be a Casper policy that says bind to AD. So the script that you're running is just checking, is the connection to Active Directory working and healthy, and if it's not, then trigger the event to rebind to AD.
okay.
I wouldn't ever store a rebinding script locally on the machines, especially laptops, because that means you've got a domain admin or a domain account with the username and password in clear text on a file wandering around. So yeah, just have it then trigger either a Casper policy or some other mechanism to rebind.
What would you recommend for an environment where you don't really have mobile device management or an MDM solution? Would it be just something that runs like as a cron tab or something, at least for the checks of some sort?
Yeah, I mean, the actual triggering the check, I mean, you could just do it as a launch agent or launch daemon. I wouldn't really use cron anymore, but yeah, just a launch daemon that runs either a login or on some sort of timed interval do some sort of check. But if a site's got Macs and Active Directory, I think they kind of need an MDM or of some kind. Yeah. Hi.
Do you have any suggestions for Macs that have to be shares?
So the question was Macs connecting to DFS shares and any suggestions, and what kind of problem are you talking about?
We've seen a lot of issues with like file locking with temporary files, especially for like Excel and Microsoft Office files. And then we've also seen that Macs are connecting to target folders that are not enabled.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the problem was a couple of problems. Things like file locking, connecting to. Do you say connecting to the, sort of the wrong target folder?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you don't have arrows enabled, the Mac authenticates for that domain controller, it will still connect to those shares, even if the adventure files aren't enabled.
Right. So yeah, either getting directed to the wrong server. So generally, Macs connecting to DFS. Yeah, no easy answer on that one. We've used it a bit. It depends on the environment. If it's a very Windows-heavy environment and there's a small Mac department, we typically find they can have DFS, but typically they're still only connecting to like one server or something. So we'll kind of just ignore DFS and just go direct to the server, just to make it all simple. If it's a very, very large Mac population, they need the functionality of DFS. And the only other alternative that I've seen is the Extreme.zip product. But I'm not sure if that will actually get around that issue, really. Yeah, it's just not, it just doesn't really work properly in our experience. Hi. Did you have a question?
I'm not sure how to phrase the question, but how many people or has anyone actually seen problems where you connect to a network drive and then you go to change a file and you can't save it back to the network drive?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the question is, open a network drive, open a file, make an edit, try and save back, and then it says no. And then you check the permissions, and the permissions are all fine. It's just got itself confused. There's a number of calls. We can kind of reduce the number of occurrences for that, and it depends on the application. But stopping machines from going to sleep as much as possible is one thing, because laptop user, close the lid, go somewhere else, reconnect, gets confused. Microsoft Office specifically, with its folder that it has to have in the root of the network drive, it's a dot. Not a DS store file. No. So Microsoft Office uses a folder at the top level of every share, and every user must be able to read and write to it. And if they can't, sorry. It is, yeah. I think it's I'd like to say .temporary items. I think it's that, yeah. So, and you don't see it, and it's hidden away. But if you make the root of your network drive read only for everyone, and that folder gets created, then no one can write into it, and then that causes that problem as well. But that's Office specific. Right. Okay.
We also noticed that if we disabled quick look, that problem almost entirely went away from us.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the other tip was disable quick look.
Are custom, have you seen the preview icons related to that at all? Yeah.
It's a shame that you're kind of like just switching off all the OS 10 functionality and then it and then it works. But
yeah, it's anything that tries to impound the file to do something to it. Quick look is one of them. The preview icons is another, and another one is column view, because that last final column, if you have a file highlighted and you save it, and so the operating system goes and changes it, and the finder says, "Oh boy, there's something new." The thumbnail here, and it impounds the file. In the midst of all this transaction, you can hit the operating system. It says, "Heck with that. List view is your grab."
cool. Okay, so we're just hitting the end. I'm just going to come to someone had one other question just over there.
I'm wondering, how do you trigger the logout script to sync? What are you using as the trigger for logout?
Just logout hook. Just using a logout hook. And there's no good alternative at the moment, but yeah, logout hook for now. So cool. Thanks very much. And, yeah.